remember talking to a tech CEO where I was kind of making a joke, I'm the safety commissioner, and my 10-year-old, when I was away, I saw that she had created a new TikTok account, and I got home and I said, I created a TikTok account. No, Mom, but I'm like, it says Piper Obama. Who else would that be? So we went on, and I said, we're gonna remove the account together, and she had been removed for minor safety violations. So I said to the tech CEO, your algorithms actually work. And he said, yeah, we can tell the age of a person within 3 seconds. And then I went down the track and I said, so do you collect biometric information? No, we don't. Then how can you detect the age of a person within three seconds? So I want to kind of get a little bit back to the incentive piece because it's related, and this goes back to the whole idea of safety by design. And I decided that this was something that I wanted to do with industry rather than to industry, and as a regulatory enablement mechanism. And I think big ticket tobacco is a great example, but so was the auto industry. You and I probably remember when we used to ride in the front seat bench of our parents' wood panel station wagon,
right.
And there
Without
were no seatbelts.
Yes.
There were no seatbelts, but it wasn't until Ralph Nader wrote Unsafe at Any Speed, and there was clear data that using seatbelts reduced traffic fatalities, and governments started to regulate. So now we take for granted all these safety features that exist, and car companies compete on safety standards. We see the same with food safety standards, but this technology exceptionalism, where something special, we shouldn't be regulated, we can't be regulated. Again, I agree with you. It can be surgical because we want the innovation and the benefits to continue, for humanity to be able to benefit from, but we have to find better ways to incentivize them to identify the risks and the harms up front and build those digital seatbelts and
I would argue that actually it needs to be even more surgical than with tobacco. Tobacco is a product that is toxic when used as directed. Tech is something that we need skills in. It is as necessary to us as air and food in the 21st century. So we have to be much more surgical in the sense that we don't want to create essentially digitally illiterate kids by blocking them off. But we do need to help them navigate this so that they can use this incredibly powerful tool in ways that help them be healthier and smarter and kinder to each other.
I think the other, yes and yes. I think the other question that I sit here and I think about as someone that talks to kids pretty much every single day of my life is that we are sitting up on this stage talking about big tech as the Facebooks and the Instagrams or the Metas of the world. I'm sorry, but those platforms are the yesterday of the next generation. They are already looking for new places because they don't trust Mark Zuckerberg. Our girls came out and broke the Facebook files and shared their stories with the world. And so I guess one of the questions that I have for you is that, yes, we need to regulate the here and the now and what is, but there's already decentralized X competitors that are coming up because people are losing trust in these platforms. How do we define what big tech is? Is it a certain revenue number? Because a lot of these bills that are being passed, they don't apply to all emerging tech companies. And that's a question I think about a lot, is like, why are we waiting until they reach these heights before we start regulating? And what do we think big tech should be defined as?
I don't think the target is necessarily big tech. I would say that some of the worst perpetrators we go up against are individuals who are finding ways to creatively misuse those technologies, so turning those tools into weapons. But also, there's some really bad sites that host child sexual abuse material, war material, and because we haven't consistently regulated around the world, we have permissive hosting environments that let this thrive, and whether it's the First Amendment or something, another construct that sort of prevents regulation. I just want to share that I'm an American born, and I believe in freedom of expression, but it's really interesting to look at the debates in Congress around regulation of big tech, because it's about are you censoring conservative voices or progressive voices, whereas in Australia it's an incredibly bipartisan issue because we understand that it's a societal issue. And the quotient, or the line that the parliamentarians drew in setting us up was, if let's let's promote freedom of expression as much as we can, but when it veers into the lane of online harm, it starts to suppress voices, particularly vulnerable voices. So let's draw a line. We'll empower you. You need to be transparent. We'll give you powers. There are thresholds. But we need to find better ways to remediate harm to people so that voices aren't being silenced.
I have a question to the moderator.
Yeah.
So these new platforms, what are they based? What is their revenue based on? Is it also based on advertising, or is it different? Because if it's different, maybe the problem will be solved by itself. If it's the same model, then nothing is solved. It's just people are moving to a different.
I think that the revenue model is still the same. I think that some platforms get more flack than the others do. One of the biggest platforms that doesn't get talked about is Roblox. When you think about what Roblox is they're really taking advantage of young creators and making money off of them. That is what their platform is. There are no financial safeties in place. There are very few emotional safety issues in place. And a lot of kids love that platform, and a lot of brands are going there and building their Roblox universes. And so I guess what I would just say is that, yes, they're going to different platforms, but they're not operating much differently because we still live in the same business system. And in America, we're still operating within a capitalist society. I think these kids, it really comes down to brand value, which is part of what is one of the business incentives of doing this, is to capture the next generation, to say, you know what, I'm not here to harm you or kill you. I'm here to at least try to invest and sit down with you. And Pinterest is actually a company that has invested in doing that. And I've personally been able to sit down with them and say, like, hey, why did this happen to this teen? What are you going to do about this? And if they're not, they're going to lose that generation of consumers who are going to have the greatest amount of purchasing power in the next 10 years.
Well, and really, I think just to build on that, some of the other comments, I think when you're addressing an issue like this, you go broader first instead of focusing in too soon. And I actually point to the objectives of the Human Change Campaign, right? So first, how are we making sure that we are really advocating, and that's where I would kind of place policy, right? How are we making sure we're educating teachers and families? I might even throw young people in there too. And the third, how are we making sure that the third's escaping me? Who can help me?
Activate.
Activate. Yes, activate. So there's ways to shift social norms so that we actually have kind of built in this desire for the right behavior and this desire to create spaces for young people and adults that really promote social health, behavioral health, emotional health. And then work backwards from there. Otherwise, you're constantly swimming upstream.
Yeah, and it's tops down, bottoms up.
Yeah.
That's my favorite type of approach. And I think one of the other things when you think about it from, we're all business people here, this is the World Economic Forum, is how do we qualify and quantify that? What are the business KPIs beyond retention? And what does that framework look like? And how can it be implemented across tech companies so that we're not only reporting it so that we don't get harmed or so that we don't get charged, but that we're actually looking at engineering improvement within these tech companies based on their ability to provide emotional agency rather than just retention, stealing, and pulling data. And so I'm just curious from a broader perspective, because we could sit here, we could pass policies, but if it's not measured, it's not managed. So if we were to create a dashboard, and each one of us had a KPI and we were CEO of the internet, what would a KPI be that you would want to measure within that company to support a lot of the results that we're speaking to?
Mine would be health, physical, mental, and social health. And I think one of the mistakes we've made previously is we've made this values-based, right and wrong, good and bad. And every one of us in this room has a different value set. And we will argue as long as you let us, and we'll walk out with the same value set. But if you can provide facts about how we are changed by the screens we use and how we use them, we can agree on that. And it takes the emotion out of it and the morality out of it and makes it more about how do we survive as individuals and as a community.
I think because I don't think there's much transparency, we don't really know what goes on there, and it's very hard to assess if your clothing is true or not. For me, the important thing would be to see that they have shifted their different business model, whether it's a subscription business model or something else. Because as long as the goal is to keep us online so they can sell us advertising, I don't think things will change. We might think they change because we don't see what's happening, but I think they'll remain the same.
Yes, I'd have to double down on transparency. I think absolutely, especially in regards to the amount of data collected from young people, and in particular what's done with that data. Are you doubling down to keep a kid scrolling, or are you taking steps to kind of cool the jets a little bit? There's easy ways to report on all of that, and I think when you think about regulation, any policy maker will tell you better transparency equals better regulation.
The reason we're aspiring to more transparency is so that we can have a degree of accountability. And you can't be accountable and you can't measure what matters until you actually know what's happening under the hood. So what we're trying to do is shine a light on safety weaknesses and inadequacies. And what we're trying to do is call on the collective brilliance and the tremendous financial resources and advanced technologies of these companies, and to get them to look at trust and safety as making good business sense and as an enhancement to user experience or customer experience, rather than looking at it as a cost center or an impediment. Use that innovation and investment to make positive change. You'll retain a lot more advertisers and humans that way.
How do we create the second bottom line of the wellness of all of us? How do we do that? Because if they're driven by the dollars bottom line, this would be very, very hard to control. But if we can turn it around and say, look, you are changing individuals in society in a lot of positive ways, but in probably many more negative ways. Can't we make this, and your idea of tax incentives, I think, is absolutely pertinent, because they're not going to do it just because it's the right thing to do. We have to make it a good business decision.
And neither are most people that I sit down with. You know, I sat down with a man the other week. He's a philanthropist, and he's like, hey, the reason why I put art on my EV chargers around the world is because they gave me more dollars off my taxes. That's it. I'm like, you don't love art. You want money off your taxes, and it's actually beautifying the world. So I think we have to also play the game. But what I will say is that if we can collect data, we can tell the story of data. And I think we are too focused in this system of how much is each user worth. What if we go from UX to HX and we start reporting on the human experience and not just the user experience, and looking at emotional resilience and also how content impacts humans in the internet as one of our metrics. So with that, I'm sure we all have ideas for ways that we can measure and implement this, but I'd love to open it up to the group, as many of you are here to address human change, and let's give it up for our brilliant panelists. Any questions? No questions? Oh, yes.
Hi, Camille here. Thanks a lot, panel, for very interesting discussion. Listening to you, I have the sense that a lot of what we're facing is preventive in nature. And especially the analogy that you mentioned, swimming against the stream. So I wonder what can be done so it's not that reactive, but it's actually proactive.
Well, I think let's look at AI as a microcosm of what we need to see happen in terms of creating safety. Right now, most laws are applied post facto after the damage has been done. We're taking down the content where, we're punishing the perpetrator of the platform. One of the things we're trying to do, one with Safety by Design, is incentivize the companies to build safety protections up front. The other is through tools like codes and standards. And standards are what engineers build to. And in, I guess, legislative parlance, it's about ex ante laws, which basically says to the companies, if you don't prioritize safety or build things in a safe way, we can verify it. That's where the penalties will come in, because once AI, for instance, is extricated out into the wild, it's just going to be an endless game of whack-a-mole. We can't put that genie back in the bottle. So we need these companies thinking about the risks and the harms and building safety protections at the design phase, when they're deciding what data they're going to scrape, when they decide how they're going to train that data, all the way through the system and the model development and up and down the stack, particularly when you're talking about open source models. So I don't think there's a one size fits all, but I think we need to think about how we as you said, get ahead of the issues. we've seen this game before in Web 1.0 and Web 2.0. We need to learn the lessons of today and apply them towards the technologies of tomorrow.
And I think the moral of the story here is that we are all a part of this change. Whether we are parents or we are lawmakers or CEOs, we have the opportunity to be a part of what is tomorrow. And we cannot sit out on the sidelines in apathy or in fear, or because that is destructive to humanity. This is more than just about brain health or mental health if you believe in it. This is about the evolution of what we will look like as man and technology become one. Does anyone else have a guy?
Yeah, I want to answer this. I think it's going to be reactive and proactive the same way because it's not really stopping here. If anybody's been in the airports in New York City, all of them have 4 iPads on every table. You cannot have a conversation there. This is basically designing for overuse. And we're moving towards smart cities. We're going to not be seeing people all day. I mean, what we're seeing now on a small scale, like shopping, automatic shopping, this will be everywhere. You'll go into a building, you won't see a person. You'll go in with your biometric. So, with tech companies, we may have to react because we didn't react in time. But with creating new social norms, for example, when you talk about incentives, if you're thinking about restaurant owners, why do we have to have QR codes in restaurants instead of menus? Because when you have a QR code, you have the phone on the table for the beginning. So there are things in which we can be proactive, and maybe that's outside the tech industry, actually.
We're all going to look like the humans in WALL-E.
Oh no!
Got a question in the back here.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you so much for the panelists. Incredibly enlightening. I think my question is for Mr. Doolittle. One of the things that you said that really stuck with me is the issue of transparency, and I'm kind of wondering from a policy background, that's where I come from, and that's from U.S. based. So, from your perspective, if you were the head of the DOE, or if you had a magic wand that could make U.S. Congress do what they're supposed to do, what are maybe the top 2 or 3 things, ideas, laws, policies that you would change that would really, you think, make a big dent from this?
I'll give you one, and we actually have a magic wand question. So
This
thank
is
you.
you've concluded the panel.
Oh, yeah. It's magic wand, right? So I can do whatever I want with the magic wand. What I'd really say is protect our data. I want to own all of my data in every circumstance and in every setting on every device. Yes. I want that for every citizen. I want that for every kid. We think about how we show up in the world today and how different it's been in years past, but there's also really interesting parallels. So when you think about what some of these points about organizing and building movement, so we're not swimming upstream. When you think about the history of labor unions, and there's some teacher labor union folks that have been in the audience, labor unions developed at a time when, for the common person, your primary bargaining chip with the society that you're a part of was the labor that you were providing. That's still the case in a lot of ways, but that is rapidly changing. And I would argue that the future looks like a world in which our primary bargaining chip is our data. So what would it look like to develop data unions, for example, that we can kind of pool our collective power and negotiate with Congress, negotiate with big tech as a collective. So, if again, magic wand, right? I want it all. I don't want anybody to know anything about anything I do online unless I tell them it's okay.
To build on that, Charlie,
Yes.
we all remember in the Industrial Revolution when they were big machines in factories, a lot of children were hired because they could crawl inside the machines and untangle things and things like that, and they were expendable, right? They were small enough to do the job, they didn't have to be paid very much, and they were expendable. Now our children are being used for their data. We should think about child labor laws or child resource laws as a way of looking at this. And I think that the labor market is really important, that it went from labor to data. Can't we use those child protection laws in data?
And the companies are not the only ones taking advantage of their children's data. Parents are also using their children's faces to provide revenue for them. And there's a whole movement of that. And Illinois was one of the first states this year that pushed a bill forward that basically said if you make over a certain amount of money and your child's photo is in that photo, you have to allocate some of those funds to that child. And so I think that's another part of it is even though tech is a part of the problem, there are also a lot of parents that are a part of this problem. And it has long-term social and emotional repercussions. Yeah. Yes? And do introduce yourself, your name, and perhaps where you're
Yes.
from around the world.
So I'm Marco. I'm the CEO of Virtually, which is our well-being platform. So I wanted to ask, how can you prevent harmful content without collecting the data? How can you prevent harmful content without impacting the freedom of speech as well? This is a paradox.
You don't shout fire in a crowded theater, right? That isn't protected speech. So we have to have some limits to what is okay and what is not okay. And that is a sticky thing. But I think that we have enough data about how children and all of us are harmed by certain kinds of content that we can start to limit this. And go ahead.
You must collect data in order to stop that, though.
Of course.
So you can't aspire to a full transparency world. You must collect something in order to protect people
Yeah.
utilizing social media.
It's not about collecting the data, it's about exploiting the data.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
And being able to opt in, sorry about that, being able to opt in, right? So if I as the consumer am empowered to say when and how, I'm the consumer empowered to make sure my child, I make that choice, then companies presumably would be incentivized to create those spaces that are healthier. Still obviously collecting the data from those who choose, but then more driven by their desires than by continuous ongoing scroll.
So is it possible to collect data and then prevent these harmful contents and then delete the data? This
Or
is
give it back to the person you collected it from.
The question is, why are you collecting the data? Are you collecting it for your
Yeah, but-
revenue, or are you collecting it for protection?
true, but this goes back to the protection sort of subject. Obviously, it connects to the profit as well of the companies, which is the excuse. You know, they use the excuse of the protection in order to justify their profit. But at the end of the day, the data is collected. So, how can you check if a company actually, deletes or gives back your data?
Transparency.
Transparency.
Right.
Yes, but how do you attain that? Obviously, there are technologies like a blockchain. Maybe you put everything on a blockchain, everything is transparent. Fair enough. But how willing are companies or regulations or the users themselves to adopt these new technologies or trust these new technologies when current technologies are all broken? Can we call them broken? Well, we can't trust them anyway. So how do you do so?
Well, can I just say blockchain's a perfect reason why accountability and transparency have to come together, because if you're using the blockchain, you can have very harmful data that's permanently captured on a ledger, and nobody actually is responsible for that. That makes notice and takedown, for instance, virtually impossible. I mean, I think we're going to have to evolve our policy thinking, become anticipatory regulators, and think about what these new paradigms look like. Again, this whole debate around age verification, there are technologies that are being developed where you can securely store it and do real-time liveness tests through selfies in ways that are privacy preserving, but you're preventing children from accessing content that they shouldn't. And we need to think about maybe even auditing these technologies. And that's going to become another skills challenge, because regulators like myself want to think, where do we get people with the skills to do algorithmic auditing, for instance? They're all working within the companies, and we've got that too.
True.
You hire the hackers, right? To police it.
Final question? Wonderful. Well, thank you all for being here today. Please stick around. We have multiple panels tomorrow, and every one of us has an opportunity to be a part of the change. So keep your phones down, eyes up, and chat up with someone that you haven't met before.